everyone approaches stories through their own lens, with bringing their own experiences to it. So people have really different experiences with the same book. But one girl that I knew, her teacher, and her teacher was showing me the journey that she was going on as she was reading Rump. She had a lot of learning difficulties, disabilities. She really struggled. And it really affected the way that she viewed herself. But when she was reading Rump, there's a theme in that story, without giving too much away. There's a theme that we're all kind of trapped. So she felt overwhelmed by her weaknesses, by her struggles. But as she was reading Rump, there's another part to that, another theme in there, where there's something greater in us that can overcome those problems. I feel like it's not like I want people to come away feeling like, oh, I'm so great and the world's great and it's all going to be fine, because some things are just hard. But we do have this incredible capacity, more than I think anyone realizes. There's an incredible capacity within our humanity to overcome those problems.
Hello and welcome back to A Literal Journey, where I interview fantastic authors of great stories. Today I have the honor of interviewing Liesl Shurtliff. She is a New York Times bestselling and award-winning author of books for young readers. Young readers, like my kids love her books. I would sit down and I would ask my kids, what are we going to read today? What are we going to read tonight? And in the dark, I'm sitting in the hallway and I'd hear my son, my little 6-year-old son, he would go, Rump, Rump. They love her stories. And so her books include Rump, Jack, Red, and Grump. About that, very exciting. She now lives in Chicago with her husband and 4 children. So Liesl, thank you so much again for agreeing to do this interview. This is wonderful. This is an honor. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for asking.
So let's just start with your background. What first sparked your love for storytelling?
Well, I've always loved stories since I was a little kid. I think that's very human for us to love story. And I loved being read to. I loved hearing stories in my family. I feel like my family has a rich tradition of storytelling and almost like family lore. And it did not really occur to me to become a writer, that I myself would become a storyteller or a writer, until I was an adult, until after I had graduated with my degree in music, dance, theater, and then I started writing. And but I've always been very attached to stories, and particularly the stories that I read as a child have a lot of I have a lot of emotional attachment to them. They were kind of like really good friends and anchors for me in times that were difficult sometimes.
Well, yeah, actually, my second question was a follow-up. Were there particular books or authors that really stood out to you, that really influenced you when you were younger?
Yeah, well, I loved Roald Dahl. I loved Matilda. I remember I have a really strong memory of my 4th grade teacher reading that aloud to us, and it was just so fun and magical. I loved The Boxcar Children by Gertrude Chandler Warner. I really wanted to live by myself in a boxcar without my siblings. No siblings were allowed. Wait Till Helen Comes, which is a ghost story by Mary Downing Hahn, who's the queen of ghost stories. So now that, we're coming up on Halloween, if anyone wants to read scary stories, that was my favorite. And I read, all of Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary, like all those classics I grew up reading.
That's remarkable. Wait till Helen comes. I just pulled it off the live.
No,
That's one of my favorites.
and that's the original cover.
That's the
This
original. Then the one, and it was the one my fifth grade teacher read to us. This
Oh
one.
my gosh. So I found that in my school, in my elementary school library, and I picked it up solely based on cover. I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do. And
Yeah.
and
Yep.
I could not put that book down. And I would check it out of the library. Like every time we had library time, I'm like, I'm just gonna go Wait Till Helen Comes. I think that was
Wow.
my fourth and fifth grade year. I just loved that book.
Well, and I made a note. So when I asked you for the interview, I sent you an email. It's hit or miss with some authors. I know they're busy. They've got lots of things going on. I remember I made a note that you had been particularly excited by the fact that I was reading the books to my
Yes.
kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Like,
mean, I feel like I wrote those books, one, to be read aloud. I feel like they're meant to be read aloud. I have a theater background. I feel like there's a theatrical quality to my books.
mhm.
Um, and but I also like it's also my belief that books are meant to connect us and to bring us closer together as families, as communities, as friends. And it really makes my heart sing when I hear that families are reading books together. I love it when schools are reading them together, but when I hear that parents are reading to their children, I'm just like, oh, it's going to be okay. The world's going to be okay because parents read to their children.
I agree with you. I think that reading stories um, is particularly binding. I don't know. I can't explain it. How did your upbringing? I mean, you were raised in the mountains of Utah.
Yes.
How did your upbringing? You mentioned your family. How that influence your writing and your stories?
Um, I think hugely, but I also think in a lot of ways subconsciously. When I'm writing, I'm not necessarily thinking of my experiences or my, family or people I know, but that all seeps in. Like our writing is just, you know, a combination of our experiences and who we are and our thoughts and feelings, and it all comes out on the page. So I'm not always thinking like, oh, I'm going to make this character after my mom or my brother or whatever. But when I'm finished with it and I look back on it, I can see it on the page. I'm like, oh, I definitely, this was came out of me from this experience or this person. And it's very easy to sort of see where things connect to my life.
When did you realize that you wanted to be a writer?
It was kind of gradual, honestly. It wasn't like, it wasn't a flash or anything. I had graduated from BYU. We had just moved to Chicago. I had just had my first child and I was at home. I wasn't, with a baby. I wasn't like running off to the theater or auditions or anything. And I was bored, honestly. I was so just bored out of I told my editor asked me this question. I was like, I think boredom brought me to writing. And I I saw an advertisement for a writing course just for children and teens. And I decided to take it just for fun, just purely like, I'm just going to do this for fun. I don't really care if anything comes of it. And, but then the more I learned, the more experience I got, the more I realized I actually love this. And I think I realized I loved it more even than performing. And what I really loved about theater wasn't necessarily the performing piece, though I like that too. Um, it was the character development. It was the story
Mm.
arcs that when we would study those and even like developing these characters and figuring out how they were going to get what they want, and that's what I loved. And so it felt like that tied in really well to the writing. And so it was just very gradual. I just kept going. I tried lots of different things. I was writing really bad picture books. I was really bad poetry. And then I moved on to really bad novels until I felt like I eventually became less bad and then mediocre. And then pretty good. And so when I felt like I, finally was like, I think I can do this. I think maybe I might be able to write a book that I can publish. And that's honestly something I never thought I would do. So it's like I had to like trick my brain. My brain had to be sort of coaxed into believing that I could be a writer.
Well, I have a friend who's a sculptor. She's actually down in American Fork, but she was an opera singer before, and she talked about how the arts are the principles of the arts are transferable. And she's like, because
Yeah.
she went from singing in the opera and doing like building that artistic creative talent, and then she transferred over to sculpting, and she's like, it was hard just getting the feel of it, but then the principles all applied. And I was like, I don't even understand what you're talking about. That doesn't make any sense to me. But
It's
I've
true.
seen it.
I feel like that it's that developmental creative process is totally transferable. The principles are very much the same. You start with something so small, and it just you continue to build on it and develop it until it turns into something that you think is worth sharing. I don't know.
Well, and then there's just something about, I mean, I've talked to a lot of authors who, I mean, a lot of authors who they wrote stuff or they did stuff before they became a parent. And then there was just something about, it's not to say that anybody who's not a parent can't be this way, but something about becoming a parent just sort of changed the game in their mind,
Mhm.
for how to create and build something. How did becoming a parent for you change how you were approaching what you were creating? And
I mean, I started writing when I had my first child was just a baby, but Rump, which is my first published book, um, I think my daughter was in like second grade when that was published. So I had written that I had written this children's book well before um, my children were really old enough to read it. But so I've heard someone say, and I can't attribute that. I'm not going to attribute this to the right person, but they said you write for children either because you have children or because you are a child. and um, and I feel like I kind of have the eternal heart of a 10-year-old. Um,
Mhm.
that time in my life is really poignant for me. A lot of stuff was going on at that time. My parents got divorced. We moved a lot. I was having to make new friends. It was scary. I felt really unsure of myself. So that sort of middle grade age, that 8 to 12, just it sticks with me in a way that's just kind of where my sensibilities go when I write. It's like I'm writing for my childhood self,
Mhm.
that I wish I had had when I was a kid.
Yep. I see that. I see that. Like, the other book I pulled up was this book I pulled up, which was Redwall.
That was my husband's favorite book.
It was your husband's favorite. So this one, I mean, I don't know if you can see, that's the barcode.
Uh-huh.
My school, my elementary school, in Farmington actually closed. And when they were closing down the school, I was probably 23, and I drove back, went to the school, went to the library, and I was like, I want to buy this book. That, I mean, Wait Till Helen Comes was one of them. Redwall was another one. There was a Lloyd Alexander book I bought, but it was books my teachers had read to me during that time period because it was so formative.
Yeah, it is so
And
formative. I mean, they call it the golden age of reading, this middle grade, and that's not for nothing. I mean, that's when you're really forming your first really strong memories. You're starting to kind of really understand a little more how the world works.
how can we as parents really instill and kind of foster that reading, that love of reading at a young age?
Well, I think just reading to them, and showing them how wonderful and delightful stories themselves can be, because Reading is hard for those kids, and like I had a hard time learning how to read, so it just felt like work. So being read to was wonderful, and I kind of feel like a lifeline until for reading until you are confident that you can do it on your own.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think I think like anything else, you lead by example. You read to them, you read yourself. Um, you try to read things that they will love, that you can love together. And then slowly, when I'm reading with my children, sometimes, I'll say, "Hey, do you want to read this part?" Or, I'm reading Harry Potter to my youngest child right now. And whenever there's a letter or a poem, he gets to read that part. So I think you have to make it joyful. There's too much pressure for kids, one, to read really young, and I don't think that's necessary. Um, and two, to be reading really long, big, complicated books when they're like 7. It's just like,
Right.
let's just like calm down a little and just make this a joyful experience. Have books in your home, go to the library, go to story time, have your own story times. Just make this something that's part of your regular life, and then it will become part of their life forever. I have 4 kids. Um, some are bigger readers than others, but they all have been readers, and they all have the books that they prefer and enjoy, and I feel like, you know, they are good readers.
As you were writing and starting your story, I mean, you mentioned Rump being the first published story. I mean, what was your biggest challenge in getting your stories published, and how'd you overcome that?
So I'm fairly hard on myself, and I was pretty determined. Like, I didn't want to go out with a story until I felt really confident that it was good enough to be published. And I know that there's no guarantees and that publishing is really competitive, but I had done an enormous amount of research on the publishing industry, on agents, on how other authors got published. And the internet is a really great thing for that because you have so much access to other writers' experiences and agents and editors and what they're looking for and their opinions on things. And so I was very, very well prepared, I feel, um, in understanding how this business worked. And I think if up and coming writers do that, if they spend some time trying to understand how the industry itself works, they will be leaps ahead of other writers, like in the top 5%, if you just know how to write a query letter. um,
Right.
so once it, I think the biggest challenge was honestly feeling that I was ready. It's just like, am I ready for this? Is it good enough? I hate rejection. I just absolutely hate it. But so I wanted to give myself the very best chance I could. So I did a lot of preparation. I did a lot of, I said this was my first published book, but I had written 2 other novels previous to this that I didn't even consider sending out. I was like, they're just not good enough. And they weren't, for sure. But Rump, I really felt like it was good enough, and that I wanted to share it. And so, I did a lot of research on agents, on agents that represented middle grade, particularly fantasy, and uh, wrote query letters that were very individualized to these agents. And one happened to pick me up, and said they wanted to represent me. And then we did a little bit of editing together on the story to make it really, stronger for submission to publishers. And we went out, and I think we had an offer within just a couple of weeks.
Wow.
That's unusual.
That's
Um,
astounding.
it
Yeah.
was it was very lucky in a lot of ways. I just feel like it was one of those things where the stars aligned. I mean, for perspective, I have another project on submission right now, and it's been, I think, 5 months. So
Wow.
I don't think it's really like I have a lot of books behind me. I've been a pretty successful author. So, but the publishing industry is just, it's busy. Its editors are really overworked, and so there's a lot of waiting involved. But Rump, just like the stars just aligned on that one. And I'm really grateful because I was so insecure about it that I'm not sure I would have handled a lot of rejection or a lot of waiting very well. You know, once my book started, showing some promise and was getting really good reviews and started selling, that then of course that kind of makes the publisher pay a little bit more attention to you for subsequent books, and they put a little more marketing oomph behind your subsequent books. I don't want to say that, if your first book flops that you can't come back from that, but this is why, I knew how important a first book was. So I really, really, really wanted to make sure I was giving myself the best odds possible. I think there are some writers out there that maybe go out a little too soon before they've totally developed and honed their craft. And it's not always going to be a good idea.
Your Fairly True Tales series, Rump, Jack, Red, and Grump, they take classic fairy tales and they reimagine them with a twist, which is what my children love. So they knew the fairy tales, but then they like the twist that comes with it. We just watched Shrek 3 last night, and they were pointing out all the things that they knew from the different fairy tales. They loved it. What drew you to do this? What really inspired well, I guess what inspired Rump, and then what inspired the rest of the books?
Yeah, so sort of like coming to writing itself, I had no intention of writing fantasy or fairy tales. I initially wanted to write serious contemporary fiction, and I tried that, and it just, there was really no life in my writing. And I think the only reason I steered clear of fantasy, even though I loved fantasy and fairy tales as a genre, I did not trust that I was creative enough to build a new world, a magic system. That just terrified me. But sometimes I think our subconscious knows better what we can do than our conscious brain does. I got the idea for Rump while I was working on another story, and I was thinking about names and how interesting they are and how much they can influence our lives and the way that we think about ourselves. And I thought it would be interesting to write a story in a world where names were your destiny, where they kind of determined your fate. And that instantly made me think of the fairy tale Rumpelstiltskin, because that's always been one of my favorite fairy tales. And, I kind of was just like, oh, whatever. And I kind of set it aside, but it just kept coming back to me. It just kind of kept buzzing in my brain. And so I finally decided, well, I'm just going to write some things down. And it was amazing to me as I started to write these stories down. I just felt something click in me where I was like, I found my voice. I found, the stories that I think I meant to write. It had my personality in it. It had my heart and soul in it in a way that nothing else I had written had. And so I went for it. And I really feel like I'm glad that I kind of followed that feeling of just going for something, even though it scared me a little bit, because I had read so much fantasy. I loved fantasy, and I just kind of felt like I don't think I could do anything like this. But I decided, just do it the way that you want to do it, and just make it your own. And I'm so glad that I did, because if not, I'd probably still be trying to write contemporary realistic fiction that just feels flat and boring. So it took some coaxing on my subconscious, had to coax my conscious brain into trying it. But here we are.
Do you have in all the books that you've written, do you have a favorite character or scene or book or whatever that you've written that's meant a lot to you personally?
Yeah, I try not to have favorites amongst my. I certainly have like favorite parts, favorite scenes, but I will say, Red was a really important book for me at that time, and interestingly, Red was meant to be the second book in the series. Um, I wrote an entire version of it. I submitted it to my editor, and it was just, she just flat out rejected it. She's like, this isn't
Wow.
the story. She's like, this isn't the story you want to go out with after Rump.
Yeah.
This isn't, and she was right. She was absolutely right. It was good advice. I had not gone in the right direction with the story. So anyway, set that aside. I wrote Jack, loved Jack, whatever. It was lots of fun.
Whatever.
Jack
Whatever.
is like my madcap second book. It was lots of fun. But Red, so I still wanted to write Red, and I asked my editor, I was like, will you consider a totally different version of the story? She's like, yes, but it would have to be like totally different. So I went back to the drawing board, and at the time, my grandmother was, I had based Red's granny on her. And she knew it. And my grandmother was very vain in the best way, in the most entertaining way. She herself was a singer and an actress, and quite famous for her time. And she was gorgeous, and she wanted everybody to know it. And I loved her so much. Like we became very close. In the last couple of her years, I had the pleasure of going to her home once a week, and she would tell me her life stories, and I got to record them into a book for her and for her family members. And it was really, really special. And then my grandmother, she passed away. And there was something about that experience that woke me up to the story I was trying to write for Red. I realized, I had been so focused on Red and the wolf and what was going on there that I completely dismissed the Red grandmother relationship, and realizing that, that's kind of the impetus for the story. She's going to Granny's house because Granny is sick. And so I realized that this was going to mostly be about her relationship with her grandmother, and not wanting her grandmother to die, and desperate to find a magic that will save her grandmother. And it was really, it was like a beautiful therapeutic book to write right when my grandmother had passed away. And I've heard other people say the same. I had a grown man write to me and tell me that he read it while he was in the hospital with his father dying, and that the book just really helped him get through that hard time. And that, so it's special to me. That book is special to me in that way, because I feel like it has such a strong connection to someone that I love.
A lot of your books explore identity, courage, and self-discovery. You've gone into this a little bit, but are those themes that you are consciously weaving in, or is it natural? Like, as you've approached the other book, you talked
Yeah.
about Jack and a couple of the other ones. I mean, are you consciously going in there, or is it just,
No,
what you're feeling?
it's really not at all conscious. Especially when I'm drafting, everything is I'm just kind of going with my gut. And sometimes, sometimes my gut leads me in the right direction. And sometimes I'm just not listening to my gut. I don't know. That's okay. So it is very subconscious. All I'm really focused on is I'm trying to tell a good story. I'm trying to,
Mhm.
um, understand what it is that this character lacks, what it is that they want, and how they're going to get it. That's really, what I'm focusing on, is just telling a good story. When I've written that draft, I will go through and look for potential themes that I can highlight and draw out a little more. But I really try not to think about that while I'm writing the first draft, because I feel like it can get a little pedantic if
Yeah.
you are hitting that over the head too hard. Like if you're going in to try to teach some kind of lesson or bring out some kind of theme, it's just
Mm.
gonna come. I just don't think it's gonna feel natural. I think it's gonna come off as a little pedantic and stale, maybe. So I try to avoid that. But then when I see it, then I really try to highlight it and bring it out.
What advice would you give to young or aspiring writers, to, to not only to make a successful, I guess, product, make a successful creation, but also become successful writers in their own right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no one journey that is the right. There's many paths to becoming a writer and a published author. But what I think, there are a couple of things that I think every writer has to go through, and one is you have to read like the Dickens. You have to read so much. You read everything. Don't stick to one genre. Read widely. Read lots of different kinds of books. Start to see, as you read, as you continue to read a lot, you'll start to understand what good writing is. And you can't write well if you don't know what good writing is. And so that's crucial, is to just read a ton and learn from those readers. And when you find a book that's not good, that's not pulling you in, you can study that and say, like, well, what are they doing that's just not
Mm.
really pulling me in? What's going wrong here? And when you find a book that you love, that you really love, read that book over and over and over again, mark it up, understand what it is that they're doing that is making this book so good, and see how you can apply that to your own writing. And that brings us to the second part, which is you just have to write like the Dickens. I mean, just write bad stuff, write all kinds of stuff. And yeah, so don't limit yourself and figure out, like I said, I thought I knew what I was going to write when I approached writing. I thought I knew, what I was supposed to be. But I didn't. I didn't really. We don't always know where our voice is really going to come out. And it doesn't really come until you have written a lot for years. So read a lot, write a lot, and be patient.
So are there any new projects? You kind of briefly mentioned the one that's on that back burner for 5 months, that you're waiting on for five
Yeah.
months.
Yeah.
Are there new projects or stories that you're working on that you can share?
No.
I don't know if you can, because publishers sometimes have rules on that, but is
No,
there
there's
something
no
you can share?
rules. I can talk about whatever. It's just more like I hate to say I'm writing this and then it never comes. I
And then it
don't
changes. Yeah, then it
It
changes. I get
changes,
that.
and
Yeah.
who knows? Like I have there are a couple of stories that I've been working on that still are, they're kind of on the back burner. And um but what I'm hoping will come is more fairy tales.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to say more than that because
No, I got nothing out of you. I got
I
nothing.
I
Yeah.
know, I'm the
Yeah.
worst. I don't wanna I'm being superstitious. I don't wanna jinx it, or I
Yep.
just don't
Yep.
wanna disappoint people. It's like, if I tell people, it's just like, "Yeah, this is what's coming," and then it doesn't come. I'm like, "I don't know." There's so there's so many things that can there's so many unpredictable things that can happen. So, if people wanna follow me on social media, or if they wanna sign up for my newsletter as soon as I know
Yep.
what is coming next for me, then I'll share it with other people. But I don't feel like I can share when I'm still just like, I've written this thing. I'm excited about it. I think it's great. I hope it will be published. I don't know.
That was very tactful, spoken like a true politician. That was good. That was really good. Just keep dangling oh yeah, something's coming, but maybe not yet. Yeah.
Stick with me.
Hey, that's wise. That is wise, because you said you had Rump, and then it was Jack. But you had written Red first.
Yeah.
So that's
A
fair.
totally different version. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like, for whatever reason, my process is messy, it's wild. Sometimes I'll start writing something and I'm really excited about it, and then halfway through the project it just sort of fizzles and I have to go do something else. So you just never I never like to make promises until I actually can deliver on the promise, you know?
Last question I would love to ask you is, I named this series A Literal Journey because I believe that, we essentially become the stories that we believe about ourselves. I do a lot of work in addiction recovery programs, and I've seen people who they believe one thing about themselves and their whole life can go in one direction. And then they believe another story about themselves. Nothing changes. Like nothing has changed. Their whole life circumstances in some situations is completely worse than it was at the beginning. But because they believe a different story about themselves, they go on and just excel. They just become completely different, happy, wonderful people. So the question I want to ask you is, um, when people read your stories, when young readers, adult readers, when they read your stories, what is it that you are hoping that they come away with more than anything?
So in general, I say I want people to take away from the stories what they need at that time. That can look very different. Everyone approaches stories through their own lens, with bringing their own experiences to it. So people have really different experiences with the same book. But one girl that she was, I knew her teacher, and her teacher was telling me, showing me the journey that she was going on as she was reading Rump. She had a lot of learning difficulties, disabilities. She really struggled, and it really affected the way that she viewed herself. But when she was reading Rump, there's a theme in that story. Without giving too much away, there's a theme that we're all kind of trapped. We're all kind of bound up in lots of problems they could be problems that we inherited from our parents or previous, ancestors. They could be problems that we created ourselves. They could be problems that other people created for us. But life is just full of problems. And sometimes we can feel really overwhelmed and trapped by those problems. So she felt overwhelmed by her weaknesses, by her struggles. But as she was reading Rump, there's another part to that, another theme in there where there's something greater in us that can overcome those problems.
Hmm.
And it really just woke her up to that. She's just like, I have problems. I have these struggles. I'm in these, I'm bound in these struggles sometimes. But I also have this other power that can free me from those or help me unwind it or overcome it or even just deal with it somehow. So I feel like it's not like I want people to come away feeling like, oh, I'm so great and the world's great and it's all going to be fine, because some things are just hard. But we do have this incredible capacity, more than I think anyone realizes. There's an incredible capacity within our humanity to overcome those problems. And hopefully part of that is through the relationships that we have with other people. We don't have to do it on our own. We have other people in our lives that can help us, that we can go to and rely on. And so that's what I hope that most readers on some level get from my books.